The person that's coming to the Podcraft in the building is going to be very exciting. I know y'all going to have questions. We might have to open this up. Is he in the building already? David Vos. This cat is on another level. We're going to ask him. I'm going to ask him his beginnings, his genesis when he comes on. And he's coming to the stage, man. And I want y'all to welcome him with great arms, great applause. And there he goes, man. I've been watching this cat for a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Dave Vos is in the
Hey, hi. How are you?
Man, I'm good, bro. I'm good, man. How are you, man? We
Oh,
ain't
I'm
giving no
doing well.
Oh,
Another
okay.
day down and ready for another day.
Hey, man, that's how it goes, man. That's how it goes, man.
Well, that's
Yeah, I
some
like it.
beautiful pictures you got back there behind you. I love that scene.
Oh, man. Man, we
Man,
got
I'd like
birds
to
that come
be there right now.
Oh, you know about this, right? We're gonna get into that. Oh man. How are you, man? How
I'm
you
doing
feeling?
real well. I'm just excited about the video today.
Yeah, I'm glad. Man, this craft room, you're gonna love them, man. They're gonna be coming with questions, and you make sure when you have your questions, because we're gonna get a little deep on this one. This is gonna be kind of heavy, you know what I'm saying? And okay, if y'all ready to start, we're gonna start up. You know what I'm saying? David Vos, man, I'm just gonna start up, man. Yo, all right. So just for people who don't know, tell us a little bit about you and your background and what started you on your mission.
Oh man, just life, just like everybody else, I guess.
Right.
Born into the world not knowing who or what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to go. But, you're taught stuff when you're little and you just believe it. And everybody's just going along. And it seems like this whole world is just some sort of mystery, But we think we know what it's all about, because people are all kind of telling us this is it or that's it, or you got to do this, you got to do that. And so we think we've got it. Well, when I got to be a little older, my whole family just fell apart because of religion. And that's what got me really in that mode where I had to find out what was the truth. And the first thing I did was start reading a few books. I read a handful of books. I couldn't find any truth there. I knew somebody was lying to me. So I just went out and started praying and searching my soul. And that's where I found all my answers. It's just literally, I don't read books because I found that you can find a lot of good information when you read books, but you got to wait, because I feel like you've got to really, first of all, we're all talking about God. Well, if we believe in God, then why don't, and we say that all you have to do is pray and he'll give you whatever you ask, then it seemed to me like that was the best way, just to go and ask. So that's what I did. But led to some pretty interesting places, pretty surprising. And I just, kept pursuing and searching, and found out that, just about everything that I had been told was wrong. And I think the big breakthrough came through because, now for me, I don't know how it was with other people, but for me, because I was raised Jehovah's Witness, I had the way I was raised, it was like we were told that all the other churches were wrong, completely wrong. And you weren't even allowed to basically talk to other churches, or you weren't allowed to go into their churches or anything. That would be wrong, So I grew up with this where the whole world was a devil. And in a sense, that helped me, because that part was true. We'd got to be careful of the world. But, once I started digging into and finding out, well, what I did was for years, I think in my mind, I was debating a couple of questions, and it took me years to get through this. We under law or we're not under law? Because you could go round and round and round on that question if you read the New Testament. I mean, if you read the Old Testament, you pretty much believe, you got to believe you're under law. That's what the Old Testament's about, you know, slavery and, you know, kill people and war and all this stuff. But then the New Testament kind of sounded a little better. We're supposed to turn the other cheek, love one another. That sounded great, but there was still stuff in there. You know, it seemed like Paul said stuff like, we're not under any law. But then over here, you know, people kept saying, yeah, but it says that not one jot or tittle will in no wise pass from the law. And so, you know, I was just going back and forth in my mind for years, like just praying and asking God, please help me understand what is the truth. Until one day, I felt within myself this revelation, and it's just changed everything. It just put the whole Bible into perspective for me. As I finally figured out that the Old Testament wasn't just an old covenant, but it was a whole different system, a whole different God, a whole different covenant. And once I figured that out, and then I realized, well, the early Christians were called Gnostics, and they actually believed that. They were more, they followed the Egyptian mysteries. And that's another thing that most people do not understand, because I found out that this Old Testament is more like a Reader's Digest version of all the ancient wisdom. It's kind of started making sense to me that the two sides was the Old Testament, the New Testament, but the New Testament sounded an awful lot like what we were told was pagan. Virgin birth. That's what the pagans believed. And then, wait a minute, pagan. What's pagan? Pagan just means the nations. It's not a bad word. It just means the other nations. So then I found out that you've got all these words that most of them are, if you find out what they really mean, are like either the opposite of what you were told, or it's just completely misleading the way they're explaining these words. So that is kind of what got me, you know, to where I am, just understanding a few points that the Old Testament God was the devil, actually. And this is something that when you first tell somebody, they're like, oh, brother, you into something weird there, you know. But
Right.
when you really find the truth, you'll just see it just puts everything into perspective. Everything. Yeah.
That sound like a lot of beginnings. You know what I mean? Questing to see what this whole thing is about. They come with religions, and most of us didn't have a choice coming in. And you just was one of those ones that looked out. You said something very interesting. You said the Old Testament. Getting into that, man, it's very controversial. You said that finding out that God was the devil. What were you saying?
Well, no, not okay.
Let me say that right. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, there's more than one God. So the New Testament says the God uses the term the God of this world. There's only one God. Why is he called a God? I mean, what are we calling him the God of this world for? And it says that this God was blinding the minds of the unbelievers. That sounded an awful lot like the same thing that Paul and the other apostles were saying about Judaism. He kept saying they were blind. Jesus said they were blind guides, leading the blind right into a pit. So, yeah, and I got to doing some research, and turns out that early Christianity, they weren't followers of the same priesthood as the Judeans. That Israel had originally been a nation that had 12 different nations. And 10 of those nations, most Christians don't even know this, are actually considered lost. And the mystery started just unpacking once I found out that this is not talking about some people over there. This is talking about all of mankind. We're all the tribes of Israel. So Jacob had 72 children. And it says that there were 72 sons or children that came out of his loins that went down into Egypt. Deuteronomy 32:8 talks about the 70 that were the 72 that were the 72 different nations, and each of those were a different nation because they all had a different God.
Hmm.
And I found in the Old Testament where it talked a lot about Yahweh being jealous. That was
Hmm.
the whole thing. You know, he wasn't necessarily, didn't say in the Old Testament he was the only God. What it said is that he didn't recognize the other gods. They were gods, but he was jealous and he didn't want us to go after these other deities. So
Hmm.
it really started making a lot of sense. There, the whole teaching, like what we call today Judeo-Christian, that's a big lie. We were never, Christianity was the opposite of Judaism, always has been. Those are the two religions that are in the world. In fact, every nation on the face of the earth had both the mysteries. But in Egypt, they primarily dealt with the higher mysteries. They understood that there was the material world. That was in there. They had the whole wheel of astrology, had all the science right there. But remember, in the Bible, it says that Yahweh got really angry and divided their language. And he did that at Babylon. So it turns out that at Babylon, they ended up going after the lower mysteries. It even works out when you look at it in the sense of a wheel, because the center of all geography actually happens to be right there in Egypt. That's the center of all the geographical land masses on earth. And there's a lot of stories in the Bible, but it uses these different words we're not really familiar with. But one of these words, when Abraham came from Ur, which is by Babylon, he went over to Egypt, and it says he stood upon a mountain. Well, I don't know, I've never been to Egypt, but from what I understand, there's no mountains there in that area where Abraham was. It turns out he was standing on the Great Pyramid, because under that pyramid, and that pyramid probably is a monument not to some, like pagan, but that was Jesus Christ. That was his lineage. And that was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But people think in nowadays, they think, well, Abraham went off over here somewhere in Palestine and made this big temple or a monument. Of course, it's not there anymore. Well, there's sure a lot of them down there in Egypt. The most amazing pyramid in all the world is there in Egypt. And the Bible says in Isaiah that pyramid was a monument unto the Lord. So there's where the mystery started. Abraham got up on top of that mountain and he looked east, west, north, and south. And he says, you're going to become the father of a multitude. And he made him a promise. He says, I promise you, I love you. He never asked for a sacrifice. He never asked for a son. He never condemned him. He never asked him to do anything. He just made a promise. And then he gave him bread and wine with his priest Melchizedek. And so today we think of the Old Testament and that period of time as more or less being just Judaism. Like it was all right there from Jerusalem. Almost all Christians, and I think everybody in the world actually has completely forgotten about the other temple that was in Israel. There were two nations. There was Israel, and the lower was Judaism, and the higher was at Bethel as another temple, and they worshiped El. And all the prophets were, they all followed a different priesthood. We hear about how David went into the temple and was able to do stuff, but even he wasn't a priest. And Jesus said, well, to the Pharisees, he said, yeah, I guess David had some sort of something that you guys aren't understanding right now, because for some reason, David went in and ate from the showbread that was in the temple, but he had no authority. But he did, because he had a higher priesthood. So it's all talked about in the book of Hebrews. He had the Melchizedek priesthood. But see, all the prophets were Melchizedek priests. This goes back to Samson. Remember, he had a vow. He couldn't cut his hair. That's called the Nazirite vow today. It's what we always, Paul took the Nazirite vow. It says in the book of Acts Jesus was called the Nazarene, which is just the Greek or Latin way of saying the Nazarite. So they would, these individuals, their whole priesthood was that they were never allowed to eat an animal, a dead animal. So they literally, by that authority, were never allowed to even practice Judaism, because they were never allowed to. If you can't touch a dead animal, then how could you partake of a dead animal and eat it? See? So it was a whole different thing, and all the prophets came down, and they did that where Abraham came in and put oil on that rock and started by a tree. He called it the big trees of Mamre. It was always trees and a mountain, because it was the holy groves on the high places. So this is stuff that, the 10 tribes worshipped, in the north. The Judaism was in the south. So it represents our body. We have the higher and the lower. So there are these two mysteries. But like I was saying, there's a wheel, and the center would be the Great Pyramid. And then around the wheel, in different languages, there's different words, but in Greek, we call it Gilgal. So it says or Galilee, sorry. In Hebrew, it's Gilgal. So Jesus preached at Gilgal. So it means nothing to us because it's not translated correctly. That word means the circuit. So Jesus preached around the circuit. Same thing that Moses did. It says he led them around for 40 years. And then they came out 144,000 or thereabouts, 12,000 from each of the tribes in the book of Numbers. So it says he went out and then went around and around in the desert. And then none of them, they just wandered around, which represents how mankind under the law, under this carnal world, we're just going around and around under the law of this, the Apostle Paul calls a curse and a bondage. And we were dying. And this is what the Eastern religions call rebirth and reincarnation. So that was what Yahweh's laws were really about. It's sort of a parable about this world, and it's how we're just in bondage to the carnal nature. The other, so Babylon was west of Egypt, directly west. On the astrological wheel, at springtime, which would be west, the sun comes up and shines all the way up in the sky and then goes down on the horizon. This is the story of Horus, which today we call horizon or Horus. All these words have come down in our vocabulary. This is just what we don't know that they're from the ancient teachings. But Babylon was at the opposite end of the wheel as you're going down into the darkness. So that was the city that Enoch, the original Enoch from Cain's line, he built. And that started the mysteries that are the lower mysteries. So today we have the two mysteries that are in the world, and all of the lower mysteries were taught at Babylon. So when the Jews went down into Babylon, they became blind, the Apostle Paul says, and they began to believe that these carnal, this lower priesthood was the true one. And they became deceived by this God. And they taught those mysteries. But then over in Egypt, they had a different teaching. They had a higher priesthood. So Jesus came in the line of Pharaohs, and his wife, Mary Magdalene, anointed him for burial, just like the princesses in Egypt used to anoint their husbands to become Pharaoh. They would anoint them for their birth and their death. And that's what happened there with Jesus. That they just acted out the whole story, but it's the other side. So that's why Jesus really wasn't Jewish in the sense that he didn't believe in the old Judean religion. He was teaching the ancient teachings that David had taught and that all the prophets had taught at Bethel. And so the way it's come down to us, it's very difficult to sort of, because the Bible's a big book, and you've got to really go back there and read it and put it all into perspective, you know?
Somebody from the chat room said that we are the true priesthood. Said when you basically shout out to Voltage, said that we people are the true priesthood.
Yeah.
Right. So going into that, yeah. So there's a lot of symbolism that's going on, you know, that you're talking about Abraham and Moses, and according to the scriptures, who are these characters? You know, like, you know, what did they represent? You know, I know Abraham came from Ur, like you said.
Yeah. Well, excuse me. You know, there were prophecies in the first couple of chapters. The first prophecy was Genesis 3:15, that about the woman's seed. But something that's very interesting that is completely lost to mankind is the fact that we have two genealogies in the book of Genesis, chapter 4 and also in chapter 10. So we have the genealogy of Seth to Noah, but for some reason, they gave us the genealogy of Cain all the way to a woman named Naamah. Well, Naamah happens to be the same, although it's the Hebrew way of saying it, but it happens to be basically the same name of one of the great goddess mothers that we talk about all the time. You know, basically it's where we get the word mama, Naamah. So there were always these two women. One of them was a virgin and one of them was a harlot. Well, most people today think that this harlot is a bad person. But why is that woman a harlot? Because she was condemned under the law. They thought Jesus was a bad person. They stoned him for blasphemy. But remember, there was a harlot in the New Testament that Jesus forgave and didn't condemn, and he redeemed her. So, you know, if you look at the Nag Hammadi library and the Gnostic teachings and a lot of the other gospels that we're digging up now, we find very clearly that Jesus married that woman. And it turns out there was a wedding that was right there in front of our eyes that we never noticed, but it was called the wedding of Cana. There's a lot of weird stuff going on there because, like I said, all these words are just, we don't even know what they mean anymore. But that word Cana, look it up and they'll say something about reeds or something. It really is the word cannabis. It has there's a lot of stuff going on here that you know, this is about opening the chakras and learning the higher truths, right? It's very, very profound to find out the truth when we unravel these words. But yeah, she was a very important person. Harlot doesn't mean something bad. These were individuals that served at the temple. So they were temple priestesses. And the word harlot has come down today as a bad thing, but if you look it up in the Hebrew, it just means holy. That word harlot is literally the word holy. It's the same word that we use for the sanctuary, because what they did in the sanctuary and the higher priesthood was they had the great wedding, the Arios Gamos, which was to determine the woman's seed, who would rule. Who would rule? Well, people who believe on this physical plane, everything's about some literal, like Paul says, it's just a letter of the law. That's not what we go by. But people who are all concerned about the letter or the literal meaning, they always think that it's like, well, it turns into war or hate or racism or something. That's what, when you get into the literal, you're going to have all kinds of crazy ideas. But it really is about the spirit and the flesh. And so, you know, the flesh is weak and can be lured and deceived, but the spirit is eager, the Bible says. And so we have to learn to realize and wake up that there's a total different world out there. It's a spiritual kingdom. that we can have power and we can overcome this world that we live in. But it's all written in symbols there in the New Testament.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, symbols, and they try to break this down during the early stages. Or how did that work out? You know, when did it become hidden? You know what I mean? When did it became, hidden from us?
Well, I think that right at the early first century, it was you hear the apostles talking about it. They're saying, well, now there's already people coming into the church trying to thwart all of our efforts and lie and deceive people. So they what he called it is the apostasy. There were lots of Judeans that believed in Jesus, but they wanted to go back to the law. So they had a meeting in Jerusalem, and the apostles told that there was something happening, that there was this revelation that we had been deceived, that the letter of the law wasn't what we were supposed to do, but there was God was love. So it started right there in the first century, where people started, they couldn't understand love. They wanted law. Same with the Israelites when they went to the mountain and they saw God and it was light, but they couldn't handle the light. So they said, Moses, you go talk to God, because we can't, we're scared out of our minds, because it's a symbol of the fact that people weren't ready to accept love, truth, brotherhood, all of this. So they were selfish. They were following after the lower carnal, selfish nature. And so in that sense, we were like children and we had to be under law. So the Lord allowed it because we were just simply choosing that path. We rejected the light. So ever so often, the Lord brings prophets and gives us more information and guides us towards that spiritual belief. But it's difficult. So right there in the first century, you see the apostasy already setting in. They were going back to the law. You know, they were trying to they couldn't see the spiritual. They couldn't see. They were offended by things that Jesus said. You know, turn the other cheek and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or whatever. And many of his followers left him for the things that he was saying. And he looked at his disciples and he says, "Are you going to leave me too?" And they said, "No. Where else should we go? You have the sayings of eternal life." So even the apostles had found it very difficult. So when Peter was being told, wait a minute now, you're supposed to eat with the Gentiles. You can't call them unclean, because the Judaism taught that they were literally the chosen race. So they couldn't understand that they were being misled. So even the apostle Peter had to be shown in a vision that God had made everything clean. That what was unclean is that people were being defiled in their heart. That's the part we had to worry about, is our spiritual part, not the flesh. So they finally figured it out, and the apostles made the agreement, and they wrote it in a letter, and they gave it to Paul, and they sent him out to congregations. But there was always a group of individuals that were fighting hard to bring man back to the old laws. Now, the reason for that is because there's some individuals that want power, and they don't want us to wake up. So they continue to keep us thinking they're chosen and we're not. You know, they know everything and they're smart and we're stupid. But it's all subterfuge. It's all lies. They control the governments. They control the curriculum. They program us. They keep us down. They don't want us to wake up. So this is why they killed Jesus and the apostles. They did not want this information out to mankind, that there was this lower God that was enslaving mankind through the flesh. He actually created the flesh, the lower form. That's why it says in Genesis chapter 2 that Yahweh made Adam into form, and he formed the animals, and he formed the garden. So that was the lower form.
Right.
Beautiful,
Right.
beautiful teachings, but it's hard to, You have to rightly divide the word of truth.
Man, it's kind of heavy when you go back into it. And then you said that there were more deities, right? And inside of the garden, and there are other gods in there. You know, could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
On the gods?
Yeah.
Well, you see, Yahweh's name, everybody says, means I am. Well, when Jesus came to the world, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So he's always using this term, I am. So you might think somehow or another these are the same person. A lot of people will decide that's the same person then, because they're both the I am. But what we're dealing with is the I am that is the lower. When you have a concept about yourself, who you think you are, that's your I. But if you're identifying with the body, with the fleshly body, then you're really just this egotistical I am. And so this is what Yahweh says: I am vengeance. I am jealous. That is my name. I will never pardon your sins. I will make you pay into the third and the fourth generation. All of this is egotistical, and he wants everybody to bow down to him. He says his first three commandments is get down on your knees, worship me, or I'll kill you. All three, Then the fourth commandment, you'll be a slave. It was like people talking about this is a moral law. How is this a moral law? His first four commandments is slavery. So he said, but Jesus taught the laws too, Dave. Well, no, he didn't, because when Jesus came to the world, they asked him, how come you don't keep the Sabbath? You and your disciples, you don't keep the Sabbath. Now, Jesus didn't say, oh, no, that's not true. I keep the Sabbath. No, he said, well, actually, I'm paraphrasing. Jesus basically said, look, you're right, I don't. Because my father's different than your father. Your father is a liar and a deceiver. Your father's the devil. But my father is above. Your father's beneath. And my father is working till now and continues to keep working. So I follow my father's example. So Jesus declared right then and there he did not keep the Sabbath. And the first three commandments about you must only worship that God, Jesus didn't do that either. He says, I am one with God. And they stoned him they wanted to stone him, and they ended up crucifying for blasphemy. So Jesus didn't keep any of the laws of Moses, not even the 10. There were not this whole concept of morality. We're so deceived in this world, we actually believe not just that false teachings, but down to the very essence of what we think is right and wrong. We know we don't have a clue. We think literally as humans, so somehow we have to be ruled over, we can't even trust ourselves, right? We have to always constantly think we're sinners. Oh, we're not even worthy of life. That's how we've been taught. That is all wrong. When you really read the Bible, Jesus didn't teach any of that. Jesus did not teach. Not one place in the Bible does Jesus ever say Yahweh. He never said, I serve Yahweh. And people say, oh, well, he didn't say the word because they didn't pronounce the word. Well, he specifically said El when he was on the cross, Eli, Eli, hala sabachthani, which means my God, which is a Hebrew word El. Eli is I, my God, or my El. Jesus never used the word Yahweh. In fact, it says in Luke chapter, I think 1, that Jesus, it even uses the word Most High, because that's what the word in the Old Testament for our Father in heaven, usually El or El Elyon, because that's the Most High is what that's translated. But the New Testament doesn't have that word, so we think it's not in there. But all the way through the New Testament, it says the highest. It uses the word the highest. That's the Most High. Same thing, because it says the Son of the Highest. Jesus was the Son of the Highest in Luke. So it's just the same way as it literally does mention not Yahweh, but the Most High in the New Testament. So there's a lot of things like that people aren't aware of. They don't realize that the New Testament's. Here's an interesting thing. In the New Testament, God is written as Theos. Now think about this manipulation of your mind. You were told, well, that's just, yeah, it's a Greek god, you know, theos. That's the Attic Greek spelling of their god. And in other languages, they spelled it Zeus. But it was the god Zeus, but it was the older Attic Athenian Greek, which is a slightly different language. And so that was their more or less their holy language, the Athenian. So even the Koine, you know, years later, they were still holding on to these specific religious words that go back to Athens. So they were still saying theos as God, but it really was the Zeus. And so 400 times or thereabouts, the Bible uses this word for God. And yet Christians say, oh, but we don't worship Zeus. We worship Yahweh. So Yahweh's not in the New Testament, but Zeus is 400 times. And on top of that, Jesus said, my Father who is in heaven. Now, that word in Greek is Uranus. That's also a Greek god, Uranus. Nowhere in the Old New Testament does it. So that's the Greek equivalent. Well, you know, because they spoke Greek, they used those words. But at least we can prove with those words that that Christianity was not about the worship of Yahweh. That's why we have this concept as Christians as our Father. Jews don't call their God their Father, rarely, if they do at all. They say Hashem or something. But the New Testament is constantly saying there is one God, the Father, and his Son. Well, wait a minute. His Son's also God. That's a family, right? This is the Father of the gods, like, you know, in Zeus, you know, was the father of the. So we are just really not able to see these truths by virtue of the fact that for 2,000 years, there was this effort by this lower deity to keep us enslaved. He fought hard to keep us enslaved, didn't want us to ever wake up. Because once we start waking, I think that's why what's going on in the world right now is we're really waking up. And the powers that be are really panicking because they feel like they're going to lose us. So they're doing everything they can to try and take out with putting fluoride in the water. I don't know if you know, but that fluoride, most people aren't understanding this. That you go to a restaurant and you order coffee, say at McDonald's. Do you realize you got fluoride in that water? So you say, well, I don't drink my tap water at home, but every canned food, coffee you get at McDonald's, everything you eat has got this fluoride. The other day when I got this cabin, I just moved in here. And so the first day I got here, I got some water from the tap, not even thinking, and poured it in the coffee maker and had a pot of coffee. That night I could not even sleep. My bones hurt so bad. And it took me 3 days to get to where I could sleep again. That's how bad that fluoride does. But what it does is the fluoride goes in and it, just like all the other stuff, they put aluminum in the medicines, they're putting it in the canned food, in the cereal. And those heavy metals go in and they make you stupid. You know, you see people talk about the zombie apocalypse. You see people, you go down to any city, people walking around like zombies right now because they're all on some kind of medication. They're trying to keep us down so we don't wake up and realize we're God.
And it calcifies the pineal gland.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're doing everything they can to try and stop us from understanding these words, what they mean. They want you to believe that they're God, basically. They've convinced us that they went to the moon and they got these nuclear weapons pointed at us, threatening us. How do we even know there is such a thing as a nuclear weapon? How do we even know they went to the moon? Man, they got us hoodwinked. They really do. They got people so scared they run to their doctor every time they're sick. When all you got to do is stop eating that poison food and eat raw vegetables, and you'll get well. You'll be able to think clearly. But see, then once people start waking up, that's what they don't like.
You said to find out that we are God.
Well, we are one with God.
Hmm.
You know, the divine being is it's our nature. So the Apostle Peter says we're going to partake of the divine nature. Well, in Greek, it's in English, they translate it, we're going to partake of they don't want to say God there. So they translate divine nature, but it's the same word. We're going to partake of God, become partakers of God. You know, we're heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ. And Christ was with God and was God from the beginning of the world. And when he came to the world, he emptied himself and took on the form of a slave. Why was he a slave? Because he born under the law, being under the flesh. And he did it willingly. It's an initiation. We're all being initiated into these. It's like a maze. We come down into the world and we have to overcome this whole world. So that's why Jesus said, "Fear not, little flock, I've overcome the world." So we're all going to be able to overcome the world once we understand that all you got to do is realize that it's kind of like you don't realize that you're controlling everything. And you say, well, it can't be. I can't be. My thoughts can't be making the world better or worse, changing things. I mean, how could my thoughts do that? But we're listening, just like when we're not understanding the scriptures because we're listening to the letter. Same thing going on here. We're listening to this other spirit, which is the lower spirit. It's lust, envy, anxiety, all of these things. If we could just stop being afraid, that's what Jesus came to do. He came to take away what's this defilement here. And what is it? How do you take away that defilement? Simply by telling you the truth. That's all you need is the truth, because the other God's a liar. He's just a deceiver. So all you got to realize is he's a liar. And do like Jesus, get thee behind me. And Peter says,
seek
can
the
I
truth.
walk on water? Jesus says, sure, you can walk on water. But don't let anybody lie to you, and start believing it, then you lose your faith. So we start listening to this lustful thing and we start wanting things. Well, when you want stuff, it's out of fear because you're afraid you don't have anything. So I want this, that, and the other thing. As soon as we realize that I am the life and the truth and the way, as soon as we understand that, like Martha, who said, Lord, if you had just been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And Jesus said, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will never die. And he also says that you will do greater works than I have done. So mankind is definitely of the same divine nature. Jesus is our elder brother. He is the firstborn among many brethren. He came into the world. And we are all his brothers and sisters. We have the same, we just have to wake up and believe. We just have to start experimenting and understanding, getting rid of, pulling off the cobwebs and the blinders and the lies and start interpreting these words correctly. I mean, it's just like I could go through 1,000 different words in the Old Testament and the New Testament that we do not even have a clue. If we knew what the meaning of these words were, we'd realize the truth. But it's funny, you'll never find an accurate Bible translation. Never. They'll never allow it.
The translation, yeah. So who is Yahweh?
Yahweh is, according to the, they call him the
It's gonna get a little
demiurge.
heavy right now.
You've heard of the demiurge. The Gnostics talk about him. Sophia was in the light. She lived in the pleroma, in the fullness. She went out by herself into a dark cloud and created Yahweh. Well, she shouldn't have done that because she didn't collaborate with the other deities or whatever. We don't know why she did that. I don't know why she did that. But Yahweh then was made in the darkness, and he'd never seen the light. So when he woke up, he said he couldn't see anything but himself. So this is a picture of our ego here in this world. Like we were talking, we were saying that we're deceived. We've got this ego. Well, he is that ego. He represents that ego. He created, since he made, just like we're all in Adam and we're all in Christ. Well, Yahweh is also we're in him too, because he created this flesh. And his laws is what keeps us in this mesmeristic state, this deceptive state. Because he casts a spell on us with his words, his spelling. He divided our language, turned it upside down. I don't know if you realize it, but in Babylon and Hebrew, the language is backwards. You see? But in English, we go from, we read from right to left. And in the ancient Egyptian, they read from right to left. But when Yahweh came down, he divided the language. And so most of the world now is going by this backwards astrology. And people are running around saying, oh, I know numerology or astrology or whatever. What they don't realize is that, well, what month is September? What number is that? In our system, September is what?
7.
Is the 7th?
So,
Okay.
Well,
Well,
technically, like in the deep, where
Yeah.
September is 7, October is 8.
right. Well, actually,
well, I
October.
thought it was 9. All right, go
The
ahead.
word.
Are you talking about the Gregorian calendar?
Well, what I'm getting at is that September is 7. That's what the word means.
Okay.
October is
September,
8.
yeah.
Octa.
Right.
And Noevi or November
You
is
answered
9,
the
right?
question. Yeah.
December, Deca, that's 10. But our December is 12, the 12th month. So we're 2 months off. And not only that, when's the beginning of the year? In the middle of January? No, it's at springtime.
Yep.
So we're under a different system. So if you say, oh, okay, like for instance, my birthday is 8/21. So if I want to do gematria and I say, okay, August is 8 and my 21, and I'll add up those numbers, I'm not using the right numbers. My birthday is not 8/21. That's some phony system they made up. So we can never get to the bottom of anything.
Shout out to the Leos.
Yeah.
I'm
So-
8/16.
Yeah, everything's bad. See, that's why everything's all mixed up, so we can never get anywhere. Just keeping us in this catch-22.
I feel like that sometimes. I mean,
Yeah.
And
feel it.
Julius Caesar is to blame for that, right?
No, Julius Caesar didn't do that. Augustus Caesar did that. Julius Caesar was a good man, and I ain't going to tell you who he is in this video. But he's a
Okay.
very, very
No,
good
you
man.
can tell us. You can tell us who Julius Caesar. I think.
Well, that would be a
we
little.
said Julius Caesar. Julius Jesus.
July, JC,
Well,
Jesus Christ,
Good.
Julius.
after
the
On this podcast, you could do it. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, Augustus Caesar tried to pretend he was his son, but he wasn't Julius Caesar. He just wanted the power of a Caesar, so he called himself a Caesar. And then others called themselves Caesar. But see, this word Caesar is just the word that in Egyptian they spelled it Osiris. It just means the king. So Caesar was the first of the Roman kings, because before Julius Caesar, the power was with Cleopatra. She had the kingdom. And so the transfer, remember, Alexander the Great went down into Egypt and they leveled Heliopolis. Pythagoras went and learned all the mysteries from Thales and Solon, which were the priests in Egypt. And then Pythagoras went to Persia and learned their mysteries, the Zoroastrianism, and he went to India and learned all their mysteries. And they came back and they created this central headquarters of the world right there at Athens. And so these were the philosophers, and people today just think, oh, they're just smart guys, you know. They learned everything from the Egyptian priesthood. They were priests. So that was the headquarters. That's why they leveled Heliopolis, because they were going to transfer that authority to Greece, and they transferred it to Rome, and then they transferred it to the Vatican, and we've got one over there called, the Capitol there in Washington today. It looks just like the one in Vatican, but it really looks just like the one that was originally there in Athens, and it represents this temple. People think that's secular. It's not. There's a baptismal font outside temple over there in Washington, D.C., and the phallus, which is the male phallic symbol, which is called the Washington Monument, same as they got there in Egypt. That's why on the dollar bill, everybody's flashing the signs and everything, because they believe, see, this word phoenix goes back to Enoch. But the problem is there's two Enochs. There's the Enoch from Cain's, because Cain's son was Enoch. But then there's the other Enoch, the seventh in line from Adam, through Seth. And they both built cities. And like I was saying, the original Enoch built his city in America, actually. But after the flood, they set up in Egypt. That was the good side. And remember, Thoth ruled there for a while, and he had a fight with Marduk. Marduk's the bad side. That's the Bible Nimrod. They had the same mysteries, but it was all convoluted and backwards. Their mysteries, they sacrificed animals. They wanted your firstborn son. So Yahweh came to Abraham and said, give me your firstborn son. But the Apostle Paul says that the law that came 430 years after the promise, when Abraham met Melchizedek and he got the promise, well, the law came 430 years later, but it didn't make void the promise. So we have these two covenants. One wants your son, wants you dead, wants you to suffer, wants you to be a slave. And the other God that provided the lamb for us and said, I love you. Don't you worry. You're all going to make it. We're going to be fine. I'm going to send Jesus and you're all going to get saved and everything's going to be wonderful.
Wow,
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah, this is heavy, man. So if all of that, who would you say that Jesus represent in Egypt?
Well, so okay, there was Seb and Nut that had a child named had all these deities like Set and Osiris. So Osiris in Roman is Caesar. In Hebrew, it's Baasiris or Lazarus. So remember, Jesus mentioned Lazarus twice. Once, Jesus mentioned that there was a Lazarus that went to hell, but he went to paradise. And the rich man was in hell. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is Lazarus in hell or dead? Because it's the same story in Egypt. Osiris is the star that goes down into the Duat for 6 months and his rises on the horizon in his son Horus. So Jesus represented Horus and his father is Osiris. Jesus resurrected Lazarus, his father. Horus represented Osiris, his father. See, and the virgin birth was Isis. And Nephites is Martha. She was Set's husband. Who's Set? That's Satan. Set's the one that's fighting with his brother. So in Greek, we call him Saturn. Because remember, the ending of a word is just the syntax. It's the first part. Saturn. So, so all the story in the book in the Bible is just retelling the story. In other words, the stories that we have in all of the nations is the story that's written in the stars. And all the kings and the queens and the governments of the world acted out in these dramas in the temple. And they would take on the names of the gods. They'd play all the roles. But it was prophetic of the coming one. Jesus was incarnated many different times. He came to the earth as Abel. He came to the earth later on as Enoch. He came to the world, Enoch is in Greek Hermes. But it's also Thoth. Remember, Jesus was Logos, mind, the logic. But in Egyptian, that's Thoth, which is thought, mind. They're the same person. Sometimes, so there's several of these deities that were the same, different characters of the same person. So Jesus was both Thoth and Horus, depending on, because Horus seems to be, or Thoth seems to be a deity that was helping Isis bring back Horus, Osiris. So Thoth seems to be a representation of Jesus in his pre-existence. Horus seems to be a representation of him coming to the earth, dying, and overcoming Set.
I heard somewhere that somehow Inky slid up in there.
Yeah, Enki is the Sumerian.
Mm,
Yeah, Enki is also the word Enoch, but it's the from Cain. So Enki Iyah is our Yah Anoki. It's in the Hebrew written Anoki, but they don't translate it, so we never know it's the same person. Yahweh's Enki, and so if you read the book of Enoch, there's 3 of them. The first one is written from the standpoint of the Christian mysteries. So that Enoch is the Enoch from Seth. But the third book of Enoch is really a Judaic sort of midrash Judaism pseudograph, So both of these scriptures are equally true, just like the Old Testament's true. It's a story about the ego and the physical fleshly world, the lies, this government that we live in. The New Testament's true, but it's a story of spiritual things. So we have the stories in Cain and Abel and Esau and Jacob, and it's the flesh and the spirit all the way through. Jesus fighting, Osiris and Set fighting, It's the sun going around and the cycles that we all go through. But there really is some, Jesus actually came to the world and his final exaltation. So that was the last life of that particular person. So in Greek, you have him Hermes. He's also called Mercury by the Romans, and Niningsida in Sumerian.
That's a cat.
Yeah.
Who's over there? You push straight up.
But Jesus was the real person,
Right.
the real thing. He did come to the earth. He actually lived on this earth. And
So you believe in a historical Jesus?
oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So you see, you couldn't believe in the New Testament if you didn't believe in it, because the apostles, you've got the gospel stories, which could be like parables, a lot of it. You wouldn't know for sure, like if that's an actual story, but it does seem to be a story about somebody came to the world. But then you've got the apostles. If you don't believe they were actually people, then we don't have any Christianity. And if they were people, if there was a man named Paul, and we have proof that there was a Jesus and a Paul, every historian has Jesus in there, even though they tell you he's not in his histories. They're not telling you the truth, because Jesus is in the what do you call it, the midrash, the Talmud, I should say. They talk about it. They call him the, I forget the word. Was it Ben? I can't remember what they call him, but they have words for him, the derogatory words, for his mother and everything. And they say, well, Josephus talked about Jesus, but that's an interpolation. It's not really in there. Well, then how come Josephus talks about Jesus's brother, James, and John the Baptist? The Essenes, that's all part of history. So if there was Essenes who had the teacher of righteousness, were looking for the Messiah, and there's a man named Paul who was teaching about this Messiah, and John says the teaching of Antichrist is people who don't even believe he came in the flesh. And so they specifically said certain expressions that can't be taken any other way but literal when they say that Jesus was born, firstborn among many brethren. How do you take that spiritually?
The Ben Moshiach. Shout out to the chat room. Somebody in the chat room said it was the name you was looking for. I think it was in the Talmud, or you were saying one of the names, Ben Moshiach.
I can't think of the I can't think of the word, the name. Yeah, I don't think that was it.
Yeah.
What was the question you just had about what was spiritual about something?
Well, I was saying that the New Testament, some people want to take it to mean that Jesus is just a parable. But if the apostles were real people, they say that they went to Ephesus or a city, and you say, oh, but that wasn't really a city, that's symbolic, and Paul didn't really exist, and you start going down that road, what do we have left? I mean, I believe there was a thought. I'm not saying, there were some symbologies, good and stuff like that. But, if we don't have a source, a father, then maybe we don't exist. You know what I mean? You can't say that something like a lot of people say, well, Christ is in us, and he is. But the Bible explains how Christ is in us, because our elder brother is the head of this body and it has many members, and we're all part of that one body of Christ. So if I'm a member of the body and I'm a foot or a toe, okay, I know that toe is a symbolic something. It means something. It doesn't. I'm not obviously a literal toe, so that part's symbolic. But what does it mean? It means I exist as a person with importance. I'm necessary. I'm valued in this body. The body needs me because I'm just a toe, but yet the body needs me and I'm important. I need to be. So if Jesus is the head, what does that mean? He's a symbolic head. Jesus came to the world because it was written in the skies. There was an appointed time for all things. It was scheduled. And so in ancient times, they acted these things out in the temples. And certain ones of their kings were lineal descendants. And Jesus did come many times. And there were other prophets. Remember, there are the 7 archangels, and all of them are the 7 firstborn children after Adam. So remember, Enoch is the 7th in line from Adam. So those first 7, Seth and Enosh and Mahalalel and Jared and all these people, those were the 7 angels, the 7 archangels. And they're all important individuals. We got Buddha, who was once Ezekiel. And we don't know all the lives that each of them had, but many of these ancient prophets were these individuals. They were the heads they were our ancient forefathers. But the firstborn was Jesus. And so we all exist in there somewhere.
Okay. What are you trying to say? Is astrology is somewhere?
Well, I'm just noticing you're not mentioning anything about the astrotheology involved. For example, the birth of Christ, how he's born 4 times a year. You got the 4 gospels being the 4 seasons. Jesus coming from the word Jupiter, Zeus. The name Jesus being from Greek. Jupiter, Zeus, Krishna being Jesus Christ. Because the names are coming from all this Greek words, and it's all coming back to the sun. And we're seeing the correlations with Egypt, obviously Christianity coming from Egypt and all that. It just seems like from what I've learned, to be a huge science book, a very high-tech science book that's put into the stories in a beautiful way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do see the correlations where there's a astrotheological interpretation, a biological interpretation, to where you have the Christ chakra. You know what I mean? And then it's in the body being the Holy Land, and the all 12, because we talk about the number 12 is replete throughout the whole Bible. So obviously it's telling us some type of science, because we see the number 7, we see the number 12, and it's so numerical, like there's a code there. You know what I mean? And I feel like those hidden aspects, though, are the key. Well, I see the stories. The stories are great.
Here's one thing I would point out. There's 2 mysteries in the world. There's the ones that were taught at Babylon and the ones that were taught at Egypt. They're different.
Okay.
There's 2 priesthoods. Remember we talked about the priesthood of El and the priesthood of Yahweh. Okay, they were in Israel. El was up north, Bethel. And they had their prophets and their priesthood. And they didn't they argued all the time. But so there's always been both of these priesthoods. Now, today, the world's being run by the devil. So,
okay, I can see that.
So the mysteries that people are reading today are the ones where they're doing this. That's upside down. It's supposed to be this way. They know what they're doing. Okay, how
the
about
Diamond Dallas Page?
When the Pope's got the upside down cross in the back of his chair,
the rock,
and he says it's Peter, go look at your tarot cards. That's not Peter. That's Judas Iscariot that they're worshiping. It's not Peter. Peter didn't die upside down. It was Judas. He went out and hung himself upside down. You
Yeah,
look
they
at,
use everything upside. Even the pentagram
so they're
is
trying to
upside
make it
down.
holy, even though they're
Mm.
going after the apostate. Oh, but it was Peter. No, it wasn't. It was the apostate they're going after. So they're hiding things. So what happens about 500 years ago? These individuals, it's a long story to tell you how it got to that point, but let's just start there. 500 years ago, these individuals today running the world, let's just put it that way, were there in Spain. And they kind of weren't there originally, but they came there. And they started writing a book called the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah. And that is what we call the Kabbalah. Now, it's full of mysteries. You ever seen the Tree of Life and all this stuff, beautiful, amazing truths, except that it's all backwards, some of it, because it's coming from the point of view of the mysteries, the dark mysteries. They're into animal sacrifices and dark, tantric sex and all these weird things. See, the other side, the dark mysteries that they did a lot of sort of spells and negative spells, control, getting people to be deceived, forcing people to be under government, not your priesthood. Like in the new, we're all priests in the other covenant, but in their covenant there's positions of rank and slavery. So what people are studying today, when they study the occult, is they're not studying the Egyptian teachings, they're studying the Babylonian ones. It's because the Jews went into Babylon for 70 years, and when they came out, Paul says they came out with blindness. Because they went down, see, the Jews are at the bottom, and the Israelites are at the top. So this is the top temple, the light. They're down there in this other temple down here. It's a holy temple, but they've got something in there that don't belong. It's defiled. So Jesus came and he went to their temple and he cleansed it. He threw out the abomination, which is death. They were murdering animals in there. That's the abomination. We don't do that. So I'm just saying I believe in astrology, but like I said, December is now the 12th month, but it's supposed to be the 10th. So they've screwed everything up so bad that they're
I agree with that. That's what I always was my argument.
Yeah, that's
It
the Gregorian calendar. Yeah.
But my thing was everything is off.
It's
You can't look at the calendar today and get it correct when everything is all off. That's what I always said.
It's like if you know. Like the real new year begins on March 22nd.
Yeah.
But well, the planets are still there. We still here. Yeah. It's just that people change history, and they change ideas. They change the whole thing. Voss, why is that? And when they started that, you know what I'm saying? Because when they started that, they started changing so we could be more dumb. You dumb us down.
Yeah.
For control.
Well, it all starts there in the Garden of Eden. Yahweh says to Eve, don't partake of the knowledge to become like God. Huh? What kind of a God doesn't want you to be like him if he's daddy? Wouldn't you want your children to be like you? Mm-hmm. But he was not having it. He was so angry, it says in his wrath, he drove him. He says, he swore in his wrath, you'll never enter into my rest. So Adam then was promptly cursed. Eve was cursed as a slave. And then he cursed the ground. And then he cursed the serpent, which is your DNA. He brought us into a lower form. And so when Jesus was on that cross, he was that serpent on the cross, because he had to enter into this defiled form that Yahweh made and bear it and crucify his flesh in order to raise up his spiritual body, which had wings. Remember old, like Tammuz, Dumuzi. That there were two serpents in the Sumerian and in the Egyptian. They had these two. One had one side, and one the Bible calls them seraphim. That word seraph means serpent. And each one had 6 wings, and so that means there's 12 wings or 12 houses. But
get your books out now, y'all.
So the one serpent's at the so they're guarding the tree of life, which is in the center. And that's where God is. And we have to open that veil. And that's why in the true priesthood, the man's authority comes from opening the veil of his wife. And that authority comes from, it's a joint, they rule jointly together. In fact, that's called, it's in all the ancient true teachings where they talk about someday Cinderella will find her prince or in other words, the flesh and the spirit's going to become one again. And we're going to become higher. So Yahweh didn't want us to become like him, knowing good and evil, but that was the entering it through the mysteries, the initiation. Our mother, Eve, who is the mother of all living, that excludes nobody, she entered into this world through the mysteries and initiated all of us through, including her husband. And so Mary Magdalene anointed her husband for the burial and for his kingship, just as Isis anointed Osiris. Osiris was actually raised up from the dead by Isis. And if you read the story in the New Testament, it was Mary Magdalene that met him at the first day of the week, early in the morning, with the spices and the balm, and she embalmed him, got him ready for the resurrection. It's the same story. And she was helped by Nephites, who is, kind of rescued from Set. Same story of David with Bathsheba. So I was telling you this, that one of the gods, Seb, is not, most people don't hear too much about this Seb god, but he was really the father, and that's where we get the word Joseph. And Mary is just a title, so that was really Isis. In fact, remember what a minute ago you said, go ahead and tell them who that is? Well, if you'll notice, Caesar was married to Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a woman from Egypt. So it was Cleopatra in history that had a son named Ies. Eus. The ending, us, that's just the syntax. Ies is Isis. It's not an E, actually. It's an H, because it looks like an H when it's in capital. So it's IHS, is the way it's written in the New Testament. So Isis, Horus, Seb. It's an anagram. And Jesus was actually called Little Caesar. In fact, to prove that, look at the calendar. We say that the calendar started with the birth of Jesus. Is that correct?
What you said?
The calendar started with 0, right?
Yeah,
Jesus' birth, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you read your history book, you'll see that the calendar was started with the birth of Julius Caesar's son. And every nation on the face of the earth saw the star. It's recorded in China. And that star fell or rose at the birth of Little Caesar. His name was Eus. His mother was Isis, the reincarnation, Cleopatra, the reincarnation of Isis. The Bible calls Mary Cleopatra. It does. It says Cleo was at the foot of Jesus's cross. Who's Cleo? That's the Patra is just part of it's just, the last ending of the word, but Cleo is a shortened form of that. So Cleo was an amazing person. Most people don't realize it, but she had no husband at that time, except she was seeing Caesar, and they together owned the entire world. Caesar had Rome, and she had Egypt and all of Persia.
Anthony, one of them, right? Yeah.
You want to get into super chats?
Sorry to cut your wisdom. Was it Caesar or Julius Caesar or Mark Antony? One of the two.
No, Julius Caesar.
Oh, okay. While they were sleeping out.
See, Caesar is the word Lazarus in Hebrew. So Caesar died and Jesus raised him from the dead. You know, if you go back into those times, you'll see that there was a whole triumphal procession where they put Caesar's body on a cross and let him down. And these are the ancient mysteries that, remember when Jesus said, I do whatever I see my Father doing? There's a lot more in the New Testament scriptures that we're not really aware that it's there. But Jesus was also murdered just like his father, Julius Caesar. He didn't want the kingdom. He wanted a spiritual king. He didn't want the crown. See?
Okay, so here's a couple of super chats for you.
Okay.
Make sure you hit that super chat. And we're going to open up the lines for them to ask some more questions. Go ahead.
Shout out to Ceaseless. She says, feeling the build, fam.
Okay.
Shout out to Ceaseless for that $100 right there. Cover says, can we assume Satan is God's subconscious, Vos?
Subconscious?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. He says also, I am equals I. Well, that was it. All he had to say was no, because that was his question. So no.
Well,
I am. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so what did you say that it's subconscious? Well, no. See, there's a duality in the universe. So, but ultimately, if you take that duality all the way back to its ultimate extension, it's good and evil, light and darkness. But what is darkness? The absence of light. So what is evil? It's nothing. There is no such thing. It's simply that which is not, as opposed to that which is.
To even out.
So, for instance, we even have a symbol for it in our language. It's a zero. Well, what does zero mean? It means nothing. How much, if you take 1 away from 0, what do you got left? Still got nothing. You add 1 to 0, now you got a 1. But 0 itself is nothing. So there's a symbol that symbolizes it. So darkness is simply the absence of reality.
Yep.
So you say, well, wait a minute, it's real. We're living in this world. We have pain, but this is an illusion. We're dreaming this. So it's only real for us. It's not the reality.
Okay, cool. He also says, I am equals I in the AM. All right. Shout out to Richard G. Coverboy says, Mr. Vos, do you realize Jesus was a communist?
Well,
that was a joke.
Yeah. Hanzo says, David, can you speak on Osiris? I think you just did, but that's what he said there. And then, go ahead.
Well, Osiris is just Caesar. That's Jesus' father. He raised him from the dead.
Okay. Netter the Greatest says, ask him if the earth is flat.
I don't believe the earth is flat.
Okay. Moving on. Let's see. We got another chat here from Chris W. He said, where is Dane? I just answered that for him. He'll be back next week, right, Priest?
Yeah, Dane will be here Monday. You know what I'm saying? So he'll be the guest for all of those just coming in. Dane will be, Dane Calloway will be next Monday. You know what I mean?
All right. That's it for Super Chat.
Right now, we with David Vos, and we're going through some deep stuff that you probably never heard of, and a little controversy.
I know it sounds amazing because I've thrown out some things, but you know, there really is proof for this in the scriptures and in the ancient wisdom. It's just, it takes a lot to get to that. But what I can tell you, trust me, if you have to for a second, long enough to read it yourself, but at least long enough to realize, well, maybe, like, you know, might build a little hope. But trust me, our real Father in heaven is love. He does not hurt people. He does not punish people. He does not condemn people. He lets the sun come down on everybody, the sunshine on everybody. He doesn't distinguish. He's not partial. He's not jealous. He doesn't demand anything. He just loves us.
And to add on, as above, so below, as within, as without, as within. So if we practice love, you know what I'm saying, on that level, that we could reach some sort of agreement or some sort of stability, you know. That's what the world is missing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
All this fighting and bickering over, you know, religion and politics is all garbage anyway. And it's, as you breaking it down, it's like this is why they started all of this. They started all this program for an agenda. Seems like they had an agenda from the very start of teaching their religion. Keep us you know, in bondage, in some mental bondage of some sort. And then we don't even understand half of the stuff that we're reading, and it's all difficult. Like, what is all of this? What is the serpent? What's the serpent about? I just heard you say that the serpent was actually
well, here's what I said was the serpent represents the flesh.
Okay.
So Jesus had to crucify that serpent, which was his body. So I'm not saying the serpent's good. I'm just saying the serpent's neither good nor evil. It's just your physical.
Right. I'm not even saying it's evil. Right. I'm not even saying the serpent is evil.
No.
For years we were taught that the serpent was actually evil.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things. They always blaming stuff on animals. They blaming COVID on animals. They said the monkey, you know what I'm saying, or bat or whatever. So they always blame stuff. The fall of man was animals, you know, from the beginning. Then you try to come back and save him with Noah. You know what I'm saying? He's saying get to or utum de bishtim. Even older stories.
What'd you say?
Utum de bishtim.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know who you mean. The utum de bishtim. It's hard to pronounce that word. Right. Yeah, it's the same as the Noah or something, you know.
Older stories,
or
accounts of the flood, the deluge. When you go looking up those things, could you elaborate on so you know I'm gonna ask you all of these little things. I know that the chat room wanna know. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So somebody said like snakes. Moses, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of controversy around Moses also. So who was Moses historically?
Well. See, Moses married a woman named Miriam. There's your Mary. Right. Well, that means she was a priest. Well, who was this woman? Well, her father's name was a man named Jethro, and he has another name, Reuel. There's you know, all these guys in the Old Testament have two names. You know, there's always two mountains, Horeb and Sinai. And there's the two names of, like Jacob has Leah and Rachel because Yah is one wife covenant and El's another covenant. But so what was I talking about?
Historical.
The what?
Moses. You were talking about Moses.
Well,
I asked who was Moses historically.
Yeah, you know? Moses. Well, Moses's father-in-law was Jethro. That's where I got off because I started talking about Jethro. But Jethro was a priest higher than Moses. And so when Moses got there, he saw his wife. He became his wife. It's always a woman at the well, right? So he ends up dipping the water out for this woman. And she goes back and tells her father, Jethro, I found this man. And so he made Moses the herder of Jethro's sheep. See, that's a symbol. Moses was just a servant under Jethro. The high priesthood was with Jethro. And you can trace Jethro back to the Midianites, which goes back to Ishmael and Esau. So that was the higher priesthood. That's what's very confusing to people. Yeah. But I probably won't have time to get into why that's.
That is confusing.
So, but Jethro had the higher priesthood. But they were going to give all of Israel this priesthood, but they didn't want it. So they gave an appendage, a lower. They made a go-between, a lower priesthood, and all these laws to subjugate them because they couldn't make their own decisions because they were like children. So it says that the law came in beside, just as a tutor that led to Christ. But while we were under that, we were just under this lower priesthood. The Aaronic is like an appendage to the higher priesthood, which was the priesthood of Melchizedek. But Jethro was a priest in the order of Melchizedek as well. So Moses held the higher priesthood, but he veiled. Remember when he came down off the mountain and they couldn't look upon him, so he put a veil over his face. Well, it's representing the fact that they couldn't see they couldn't accept the higher priesthood of love. So they got a veil that, like the Apostle Paul says, is that Israel to this day, when they read the Bible, they read it with a veil over their face because they're looking at the letter or the literal understanding. So Moses went first up to Horeb. Mount Horeb is light, or the orb. Horeb means light. They wouldn't accept that covenant. He broke that covenant. So then he went up to Mount Sinai, which is in Sumerian. Shin is the moon. So that was not the sun, but the moon. That's a lesser light. It guides your pathway in the darkness, but it's not the bright sun. So it's a lesser law. So Moses knew better. He knew the truth, but he provided, he created this lower bondage for these people who wouldn't be able to accept the higher truth. So this lower priesthood went all the way down to Christ. And now it's over because it says that Judah shall have the scepter. That means the right to rule until he who comes who has the legal right. Who had the legal right? Joseph. He went down into Egypt. Joseph was the one who would be the remember, he had a dream and there were 12 stalks of corn. 11 of them bowed down to him. So Jesus didn't come through just Judah. If you go back to the book of Ruth, you'll find that there was a man named Elimelech and Naomi who had no children. What could that mean? El-Melech. Melchizedek. El-Melech means my God is Melech. So that was the priesthood, the higher priesthood, and he had no more children. So they had to make a levirate marriage, meaning they had to go and get Boaz, a Jew, to raise up children for his brother Joseph. So the Jews are reigning temporarily. They have no right. The one who comes who has the legal rights, King David. And who was he? His father was Jesse, the Ephraimite. Ephraim is Joseph's son. Bethlehem of Ephrathah. So Jesus was both of the Judeans and of Joseph. He was of both. But the one tribe was only temporarily represents the flesh, which is temporary. So those two priesthoods we're talking about, the higher and the lower. Jethro had the higher priesthood, just like Balaam and Balak. Balak was a true priest of El. It tells you that. His prophecies were absolutely true. He gave the best prophecy, what would happen to Israel, all the rest of their existence, if you read the prophecy of Balaam. The only thing Balaam ever did wrong was that he ended up, Balak kept wanting to curse Israel, and he kept saying, please curse Israel. And he kept saying, no, I can't. I'm a prophet of God. I can't do that. Well, he kept listening. He should have just walked away. But instead, they kept offering him money. And eventually, even though he never did it, but because of him not walking away, he ended up, it says, leading the children of Israel into idolatry. So then he became a symbol of somebody that did wrong, but not because he was worshiping the wrong God, just because his heart wasn't right,
I usually go to the Dollar Tree too. Dollar Tree, you can find a whole bunch of stuff.
But
I know. It was a joke. I know you said a Dollar Tree.
Yeah.
I said go to the Dollar Tree. Yes.
Yeah, the Dollar Tree.
That's great.
You don't do that.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a couple of more questions. Go ahead.
More questions popped up. Frank Key says, Tacitus documented trial and execution of Jesus.
Yeah. And there were
Oh.
Plutarch, Pliny, Josephus, the Jewish Talmud. It's even in bunches of scriptures, but they say, oh, well, those were written 200 years later. So, but it represents the oral teachings of people that lived in those days. And there's thousands of these scriptures that we have, including historical documents. In fact, it's even, like you said, Tacitus, and there was Roman chronicles and historical records of Jesus as well.
Okay. Moving on. Ballot.
One other thing right there. Pilate. Remember Pilate? He wrote a book and explained everything that's in the New Testament. There's a book that Pilate wrote. So we have all kinds of historical evidence of Jesus.
Okay. Ballot Brand, shout out for the 369. I see what you did there.
But Tesla.
Richard G, shout out to Richard G for the hearts. Valerie Ames says, Moab, the lion, men of great stories. Okay. Aurora Borealis says the Vatican album by Aurora Borealis in YouTube. All right, cool. Netta the Greatest says, ask Vos, is the New Testament unaltered?
Well, there are verses missing, but we have them. So it's not missing, because anything that was missing, we ended up digging it up somewhere. So yeah, they tried throwing away books and hiding it, stuff from us and stuff, but we have it all. We just have to keep seeking and finding it. It's, if something in its time, the Lord always has it come to light. So in 1945, we dig up the Dead Sea Scrolls, and 47, and the Nag Hammadi libraries, and we got all the cuneiform, and by some miracle, we found the Rosetta Stone. We can interpret the hieroglyphs on the pyramid walls. You see, it's all coming to light. So we're not going to have to worry about. The Lord will reveal it in its time, and we'll have proof for it. But I think the Bible, as it's written, is still fine. All we have to do is we have to use the Greek interlinear and get back to the original Greek.
Okay. Do you want to say something, please?
Yeah, but it's going to be drawn out, because I wanted to ask him a question about that, breaking that down. Like, how do we? You said we have to learn Greek, Latin. What is it?
Well, you can look it up, and we've got the internet, and it's both good and evil. I mean, on one hand, they're giving us all this propaganda, but at the same time, knowledge is increasing. It really is. Now, there's a group of people in the world that are going to use this information right at the end of time to become awake. And there are those that are being perverted by this massive download of information. They can do anything they want, and they're choosing to sit around and play games or get lost in some fantasy. But, we haven't got time. We got a very short time left, and we better figure out, wake up, because you see, our power lies in love and in faith. If you don't know that, you're going to miss out.
And at the end of the day, that's a good message that you're pointing out there. At the end of the day, no matter what someone's interpretation is. So that's a good point.
Ngozi made that point too. Yeah, I like that, because at the end of the day, humanity has to